He had once been a young student seeking a better life. Now, he was a man. Fareev Jason Evans, a 22-year-old university student in California, had big dreams. He had just completed his second year in political science, eager to make a change in the world. Yet, beneath his ambition, he carried a burden: fear. Jason had grown up in a neighborhood where violence and gang activity were commonplace. The threat of being caught in the crossfire was ever present. He had always dreamed of escaping, finding a life of peace and purpose. But the constant tension gnawed at him, drowning his hopes with every passing day. One night, after a class on international relations, he met Ahmed. Ahmed was charismatic, with an air of mystery about him, and spoke with a conviction that caught Jason's attention. He was older, perhaps in his early 30s, and had an aura of confidence that made him instantly likable. Ahmed spoke to him about security, about protection, and about belonging to something bigger. He made Jason an offer he couldn't ignore, a promise of safety from the dangers of the streets and the possibility of a future free from fear. "You don't have to face this alone, Jason," Ahmed had said. "There's strength in numbers. You could be part of something that can give you the life you deserve." Jason, desperate for protection, took the bait. What harm could it do to align with a group that offered him safety? He was naive, not realizing that the promise of security came with strings attached, strings he could never untangle. Over the next few months, Jason became more involved with the group Ahmed had introduced him to. At first, it seemed harmless. He attended meetings, learned about their ideology, and heard about their fight for freedom and justice. It all sounded noble. The group claimed to stand for the oppressed, to fight against systems of control, and to give people like Jason the power they deserved. But soon things started to shift. The group's discussions grew more intense, and their objectives became darker. Jason, who had always considered himself a peaceful man, found himself becoming uncomfortable with the rhetoric of violence and destruction. They spoke of taking back what was rightfully theirs, by force if necessary. Jason began to doubt himself. Was he really cut out for this? Yet, every time he expressed doubt, Ahmed would pull him aside, his voice soft but persuasive. "You're not like them, Jason. You're different," Ahmed would say. "You have the power to make a real difference, to protect your community. But first, we need to understand everything about them. We need to know their weaknesses, their plans. You can help us with that." Jason, caught in a web of manipulation, felt torn. He was in too deep now. The group had become his new family. They were the only ones who truly understood him, who promised him something no one else had: protection and power. The promise was too sweet to ignore. The task came one fateful evening when Ahmed called Jason to meet in a secluded part of the city. They were in a dimly lit room, far from prying eyes, when Ahmed made the request. "We need to know about your community," Ahmed said, his voice calm, almost too calm. "We need to know about the law enforcement, the neighborhood leaders, the key people in positions of power. You have the access. You can help us take them down before they even know what hit them." Jason froze. His heart pounded in his chest. He couldn't believe what he was hearing. His friends and family were part of the community he was being asked to betray, the people who had been there for him when no one else had. But Ahmed's eyes were intense, his gaze unwavering. "You owe it to us," Ahmed insisted. "You owe it to yourself." In that moment, Jason felt trapped. The weight of the promise, the protection, the sense of belonging, pressed down on him like an iron shackle. If he didn't comply, would they see him as a traitor? Would he lose the one group that had given him a sense of safety, even if it was an illusion? Or worse, would they abandon him? Reluctantly, Jason began to gather the information. He attended town meetings, listened to confidential conversations, and even intercepted messages that passed through the community. He collected names, schedules, and locations, everything they needed to destroy the very fabric of the society that had nurtured him. It was a betrayal he would never be able to undo, but he couldn't stop now. Jason was sure no one would ever find out. But the truth always has a way of revealing itself. A few weeks later, the police raided the group's hideout, arresting Ahmed and several others. Jason was in class at the time, unaware that his life was about to shatter. When the authorities arrived at his apartment to question him, he felt the full weight of what he had done. They had found out about his involvement in the group, and they had connected the dots. "What did you think would happen, Jason?" His father's voice echoed in his mind as he sat in the interrogation room. "You can't live in a world of lies and think you won't be caught." But Jason wasn't just arrested. He was treated as a pawn in a much larger game. The authorities had known about the group for months, but they needed someone from within to bring it down from the inside. Jason's role had been calculated, and his participation had been the perfect opportunity for them to infiltrate the group without arousing suspicion. They offered him a deal: cooperation in exchange for leniency. Jason was left with a decision that tore him apart. He could confess everything, help them break the group apart, and save himself from facing terrorism charges. Or he could remain silent, facing years in prison, knowing that his betrayal would always be a part of him. Jason chose to cooperate, but the emotional toll was immense. His family disowned him, unable to comprehend how he could have betrayed them so deeply. His friends from the community turned their backs, too hurt by his actions to offer forgiveness. Jason had lost everything: the protection he thought he had gained, the community he once called home, and the life he had dreamt of. But the emotional cost didn't end there. Jason was haunted by the people he had betrayed: the law enforcement officials, the neighborhood leaders, the friends who had trusted him. He saw their faces in his dreams, heard their voices in his head, reminding him of the man he used to be before he got swept up in a world of lies. The police may have had the evidence they needed, but for Jason, there was no escape from the betrayal. Every day was a reminder of how easily he had been deceived and how far he had fallen. The promise of protection had turned into a nightmare, one that he would live with for the rest of his life. Years later, Jason sat in a small apartment, far removed from the chaos of his past. He had served his time, completed his sentence, and was trying to rebuild a life. But the scars were deep, and the remorse never fully faded, are marked by the consequences of his choices. Choices made out of fear, desperation, and a promise of protection that had turned out to be a lie.